So this question from Gio on Instagram. After sitting out this season, where can we expect Max Allegri to emerge next season? I feel, Nicky, that there is some information in this question that I'm not party to. Is there a backdrop?
I don't know what it is about the word emerge. It's got me imagining Max Allegri coming out like a butterfly from a chrysalis, like he's ready now for his big reveal.
For his close-up.
Yeah.
I was thinking of like pulling Excalibur out of a stone.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe.
What he's quite a combative figure at times, isn't he?
And maybe that's fitting because the place where currently he's most expected to re-emerge is at Milan, where there would be something in that idea of the true heir returning, the one who led them to glory all the way back when, and who really, I think, impressed his. I was going to use the word brilliance, and I almost caught myself. But you know what? I think Max Allegri has been brilliant at times in his career. I think he's also been less brilliant at others, but in the way he navigated Silvio Berlusconi at his most interfering, and managed to show that there were ways to win and to overachieve, even when he in the season when he didn't win the league, when the club silverware was effectively being sold off from underneath him and all the players were being sold from underneath him. I thought Allegri really had a really impressive chapter at Milan, and then that ends him the Juventus job and goes on to shine. I think Allegri, I can't speak for him because only he can do that. But from the outside, you could certainly see how after a frustrating, disappointing last chapter at Juventus, wanting to go back to the roots and remind everyone this is where I first impressed everybody. And if you can do it again after a chapter when Milan have not been where they want to be, it feels like an opportunity that makes sense. He's been telling people in his network that he's interested in the job. There have been some reports linking him to the Roma job as well, but it seems very much that if Allegri gets his way, then Milan is where he would like to be. Now, it needs to be said quickly here, Milan currently don't have a vacancy.
And that they are, or Sergio Conceição is in a position where he could end up winning 2 trophies.
Yeah.
In a half a season. In half a season of absolute chaos, by the way. It's remarkable to think that, isn't it? I mean, you know, if Conceição walks away, it won't be with a huge black mark against his reputation, because I think there's an understanding that he's inherited like really a hornet's nest. Mm-hmm. And there's some things he's done well, there's some things he's done less well. And I don't think necessarily winning, well, a cup competition that he didn't have to qualify for and another one that he picked up like halfway down the road should necessarily be seen as the ultimate endorsement of him. But nevertheless, I think the thing is with Conceição, like, don't count him out at any point. That's his main characteristic, isn't it?
Yeah, Milan's season, I think, objectively has been a disappointment. They want to be in the Champions League, as do more than 4 teams in Italy, which is why that's always going to be a situation where someone's getting squeezed out of it. But absolutely, Milan, with the changes they've made to their leadership, with bringing in Zlatan Ibrahimovic, with the statements they've been trying to make about themselves as a club, they expect and intend to be a Champions League team. They're not going to be next season, and I think that Conceição, absolutely very demonstrably having come in mid-season, does not bear all of that, but he bears some of it. The team have not been consistently good since he came in, but he has, as you've already mentioned, already won the Supercoppa, and he is now headed to the final of the Coppa Italia. And I think that perhaps the part of that makes it even more resonant is that on the way to both of these situations, he's knocked out Inter, who are the clubs still that Milan most want to measure themselves against. And of course, even though they would prefer to just finish above Inter, there is a scenario on the table, as we touched on in the main show this week, where Milan could even win 2 trophies while Inter win 0 trophies. So I think there's a scenario in which Conceição could walk away quite loved, actually, from fans for that. I think there's a scenario where the club says, actually, we see enough positive to keep you on. But my indications at the moment, my expectation at the moment is that I think everyone at the club is kind of hoping for a happy mutual consent departure at the end and a fresh start.
So when you mentioned Roma back there,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, we still don't know who's going to have the Roma job
Mhm.
next season. Ranieri is quite insistent that it won't be him. However this season ends. Is Allegri the sort of guy that you think he'd be interested in? Because Ranieri is, if anything, he's a practical man.
Mhm.
And Max Allegri's football is practical football, isn't it?
Yeah, I actually think that in a footballing sense, Allegri could make a lot of sense in Rome, and I doubt very much that he's closing that door either. Even while giving indications, it seems like um, through the channels people do, giving indications that perhaps Milan would be his first preference. I don't think he's closed to Roma. If the Milan job isn't there, I could certainly see him at Roma, and I think there is actually, as Andy says, something to the idea of just quite a straightforward man who just wants to make things straightforward is something that Roma and Rome sometimes need. I do think that at just the most basic surface level, well, there's two sides to this. Roma could be in the Champions League next season. Unlike Milan, Roma are trending in a direction where they could. They have a tough run in. They have to get ahead of some teams who I think still have the advantage on them right now, but they could.
Fixture running's unbelievable, isn't it?
But they are 17 games unbeaten under Ranieri. It is not impossible that they find a way in.
Yeah.
And in which case, immediately, of course, that job becomes more attractive to any manager because every manager wants to be in the Champions League. But the flip side is actually Ranieri might be a hard act to follow. And I think that going in at Milan this summer, if they finished certainly where they are right now, which is 9th, you have a lot more upside. You have a lot more potential to say, look, I've improved from where you were.
So the answer to your question, Gio, on Instagram is we have no idea where Max Allegri is going to end up next season.
And nor does he.
Well, he may do. You never know. Mick on YouTube asks, with so much discussion in England at the moment about the gap between the Premier League and the Championship, is this pattern being replicated in other European countries? Interesting question.
Yeah,
Andy, because it's clearly there in the English league for us all to see.
Yeah, to an extent. And I think it's clear that it's about this sort of different strata that you get in football because of the money element these days. Now, even I think the Premier League's particularly susceptible to it because the rewards for being in the Premier League are so great. But I would say, on the other hand, you are getting it in, say, a league that doesn't rely so heavily on TV money as the Bundesliga, for example. I mean, you have the relegation playoff, as they call it, where you have third bottom in the Bundesliga playing third top in the Bundesliga 2, the second league, every season. It is very rare that the team from the second tier win it over 2 legs. That's despite, obviously, the second tier team coming into it off the back of a good season, and normally the first tier team, the top tier team, coming into it off the back of a pretty awful season where they can't really string anything together. And I would say, if you look at the teams, there's still a few teams that might qualify for the relegation playoff from the Bundesliga 2 this season. At the moment, the top 2 are Köln and Heisval, Hamburg, who are 2 enormous clubs, as we know. That would leave the playoff to maybe an Elversberg, for example, who I struggle to imagine going up through a 2-legged playoff. I mean, even last season, Fortuna Düsseldorf were 3-0 up from the away leg, and they still managed to go out. And Bochum stayed up. So I think that shows that it's a system that isn't really functioning. You look at how badly Holstein Kiel have struggled this season. St. Pauli look like they're going to stay up now, so that's a good thing. And you know that they are a club from a very different background to most, well, not just top flight clubs, but professional football clubs, and they're having to adjust, and they're quite self-consciously adjusting to trying to exist in the top level of professional football at the elite level, whilst maintaining their values of community, a broadly left-wing set of values, and they're finding ways to do that. But that's what makes St. Pauli an outlier. You know, the fact that they've, for example, as we talked about on our OTC documentary we made about it on for YouTube a couple of months back, they've got to find a way to fund themselves whilst not being that club. You know, they're not going to go the Red Bull route or anything like that. So basically, in short, they're selling their stadium to a cooperative of their fans to have the money to exist going forward. And that's where they are. They have to think outside the box. And I guess any team that's coming up now has to think outside the box. Now, funnily enough, I wonder what might buck this trend. And I mentioned Red Bull there. Is going over to France, where, again, it's not quite the problem that it's been in the Premier League over the last couple of years, but it is a problem nevertheless existing after you get promoted to the top level. I think the one to watch this season is Paris FC, if they go up either automatically or through the playoffs, because of course they were taken over by an incredibly rich family that run Louis Vuitton, and they sold part of the capital, minority part of the capital, to Red Bull. Now, it's similar to the Manchester United situation, in which the minority shareholder has a major role in running the sporting side of the club. Now, if you look at the Red Bull know-how and the Vuitton money, all of a sudden, Paris FC can be serious. And especially, they can be serious because the financial gap is maybe not as big between Liga and Ligue 2. You look at the way that the TV money has gone sideways, not just this season. Obviously, they're still having this problem with DAZN, who won't be, it looks like, the holder of the rights for next season. But there was already a problem going back to 2020 and the collapse of the Mediaset deal. So it has been easier to bridge the financial gap because so many teams in the top level are really struggling. So new money and new know-how in Paris FC could be one of the ones to bridge that gap. And who knows, maybe they become the next RB Leipzig. That team, if we go back to 2016, and again, in their own way, they're an outlier, RB Leipzig. The way that they came up, they finished second in their first season, and they've been in the Champions League or the European places ever since.
Yeah, two good examples from different perspectives that Andy's given there in the German and the French leagues. What about in Italy, Serie A and Serie B? How big is that gap?
Yeah, I think it's the picture is fundamentally not dissimilar to what Andy was just talking about. Ultimately, the big difference between the Premier League and somewhere like Serie A is that Premier League clubs have become so much wealthier so rapidly because of the TV money that's come in, and that model hasn't been replicated in Italy. The top flight has been actively struggling to even keep up its levels of TV revenue, let alone to expand them both through domestic deals and international deals, which creates more opportunity for teams that come up to bridge that gap. Now, I think it's still a gap that exists and requires good leadership to navigate. And so look at this season's teams that came up. Como clearly have appointed a manager in Cesc Fabregas, who I think has shown he's got some chops, and that's part of it. But they've also been led by people who've got deep pockets and know how to run the business side of things well. And so they are comfortably in mid-table. They're not at any risk of going down. Parma are in the fight, but they look like they have a real chance of staying up. Venezia are on the brink. They're in the relegation zone right now. So that's the three teams that came up last season. You want to go back to the season before that, and you've got Genoa, and they are again established in mid-table now. You've got Cagliari, who are in the relegation fight, but it's obviously stayed up last season and now are at least currently not on track to go down. So it isn't what it is in the Premier League, where you've got three teams coming up and immediately sinking.
We're expecting Sassuolo to bridge that gap when they come up,
Sassuolo are almost the reverse of the picture, aren't they? Because they're the team that went down from Serie B and have immediately just dominated Serie A. But I think they are, again, a bit like Genoa, of course, who'd gone down and then pinged straight back up. They're clubs that are fundamentally, in their current state, just not really... They're built to be in the top division.
Yeah.
And Sassuolo are a club that are absolutely financially backed by huge business.
Held a lot of their big players when they went down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like kept hold of key players because they are backed by big business. They have all these elements that even lots of Serie A clubs don't have, like a stadium they fully control. And so they have all the pieces to do it. I think it's much more, though, that sort of story when we look at all these Italian clubs. You look at the individual club and say, is this club structured to be in Serie A or Serie B? Whereas I think, again, because boring as it is to repeat it, it is so much about the TV money, this gap. Doing that in the Premier League, even if you are doing things the right way, it's just harder because one season of missed revenue is a big amount of money.
You talked about Como. I mean, is that part of the thing with Italy as well? That we've seen Italian clubs be very attractive to particularly US investors over recent years. I mean,
I think partly because of this, partly because it's possible to take a club that isn't already at the top and make it into a viable top flight business.
Because they're big brands that you can buy into and make a difference.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And for certain part of the American fascination, I say this having spoken to enough of the people involved who have bought these clubs at different times, who always end up saying the same things to you, is it's tied in with ideas of tourism and a romantic idea of Italy that they think they can sell, which some of them do very well. I would say certainly this season, Como.
Question from Carl on email. With reports that Manchester United, Manchester City and Chelsea are keen on signing Porto goalkeeper Diogo Costa, just how good could he be for a top Premier League team, Andy?
Well, I think the fact that those three clubs are looking for a goalkeeper tells you that, yes, he'll probably be able to bridge the gap as well. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, Dotun, the fact that you do have a lot of Premier League teams and Premier League teams of status looking for a goalkeeper at the moment. Look, Diogo Costa's been of interest to Premier League clubs for a while. Why? Because since the very beginning, he's an excellent shot stopper, a guy of size, with presence, who's ascended to the Portugal team and really bumped Rui Patricio out the way as well. I think he'd be good for any of those teams. And I think the timing is important now as well, because you look at him, he's just approaching his mid-20s, still a young goalkeeper, still certainly young in goalkeeping terms. And he is in a position at Porto where they're not winning anything this season. They're not winning anything in a hurry because Andrei Villas-Boas, as president, has taken over a difficult situation, a difficult financial situation, which also means they'll probably have to sell a couple of big players. Now, what they were wanting for Diogo Costa going back is the full value of his release clause, which is somewhere in the 75 million bracket. And, I think most teams, particularly in a post-Kepa world, sort of gulp at paying that amount of money for a goalkeeper. People pay more for goalkeepers than they used to, but still, it's a big commitment, and it's not like other players, despite the fact it's a key position. I think there is the possibility to get Diogo Costa for less than that because of the situation that Porto are in at the moment. So I would expect a move to happen this summer. I would expect him to do well. I would also imagine he might have a quite difficult first month or two in the Premier League. Now, we talk about how the Premier League is something tough for defenders to adapt to because everything happens so fast. And to get to the pitch of that is quite difficult. I think it's the same with goalkeepers. We've seen it in the past with like Hugo Lloris, who ended up being a Tottenham legend, of course. At the beginning, there was a feeling that he wasn't quite physically coping with the amount of contact that he would receive. Now, I know people talk about goalkeepers as a protected species. That's definitely less the case in the Premier League, even if some people still probably watch the games and think, well, goalkeepers do get a lot of protection. Yeah, more so in continental Europe, I would say. The biggest problem for Diogo Costa and the bit of his game that he has to develop, a bit like Lloris, he's brave, he wants to dominate the area, doesn't always judge crosses brilliantly. And we saw that in the World Cup, of course, when Morocco beat them in the quarterfinal. Youssef En-Nesyri, which you have to contextualise it, he's probably the best attacking header of the ball in world football today. The way he jumps and hangs in the air, he's like turbo Gary Thompson. He's amazing. And that was one of those things where Costa was a little bit too brave for his own good. He made a mess of it. What I love about him, though, more than anything, is he just backs himself in every situation. And like a goal scorer who can get over missing chances quickly, he doesn't let mistakes dwell in his head, which I think is so important. So he got over that pretty quickly, I think is fair to say. And that tells me that add that to his undoubted personality, and he's a great penalty saver for that reason, for example, I think you're looking at buying someone who's going to become a top goalkeeper in a couple of years.
I know Chris on email can speak for himself, but as he's not here, let me speak for him.
Please.
Well, thank you. He'd ask you, first of all, can he play with his feet?
Yes.
Good. And also, the Portuguese connection would suggest that Manchester United, maybe?
Maybe. I mean, I think they've got a bit of an issue in that Manchester United generally in the transfer market, clearly they have limited funds, and clearly the people running the show think that the players they want to sell are more valuable than the market actually thinks they are. So whether they've got the money to make that happen is far more of an open and shut deal for Manchester City or Chelsea.
This question for you from Leon on Blue Sky, Nicky. After Marcus Rashford's renaissance at Aston Villa under Unai Emery, are the European giants showing a genuine interest in bringing Rashford to the continent this summer?
I feel like Marcus Rashford is almost complicating his own life for this potential move by succeeding. It's ridiculous, but this whole renaissance is making it harder, not easier, for the sort of clubs that we would be talking about in Europe being able to go out and afford him. Certainly, if I look at it from the Italian perspective, at teams who were linked to him this January, Juventus probably could find money if they need to, but it's still not going to be able to find Premier League money for certain. And I would say almost every other club in Italy will be less able to, other than perhaps Inter, who I haven't heard linked to him at all. In January, it was predominantly Juventus with a sprinkling of Milan, with the clubs being linked to him. It gets harder and harder for all the same reasons we just talked about with TV money for clubs like that to afford him. And I think that broadly goes all across Europe, that there's only a handful of clubs that can even really entertain taking on players if they expect to have Premier League money paid to them. Now, I would say in the Italian case specifically, there is a very clear now trend of Italian clubs looking at this sort of English player. I think you can look at your McTominay at Napoli, the season he's been having, but obviously also Billy Gilmore there. And going to everyone who's been at Milan and Roma, there's a lot of names now. I think
the likes of Chris Smalling, of course, have been there
exactly.
several
Chris
years.
Smalling,
Yeah.
trendsetter, really.
Indeed.
But I think that absolutely has a knock-on effect. There's a real self-fulfilling thing going on there with English players coming to Italy, which is partly about players talk to each other and say, hey, actually, I'm having a great time over here and you could fit in.
It's a small community and success breeds success.
Yeah.
So it's important from the players' side, and it's also important from the club side. You look at the Japanese players who succeed in the Bundesliga after Shinji Kagawa hits it at Dortmund the first time. It's simple, but it's the most obvious, and it's actually the correct explanation in this case. But Rashford is almost a case apart. We're not talking about Smalling going to Roma. We're not talking about Lukaku going to Inter. So whereas if we look at it from what would be the most enriching situation for him, I think you can sell Rashford at Milan, I think, or Juventus, if they don't keep Kolo Muani. I think you can sell him at Barcelona, and we know they're interested in him. We could sell him at Dortmund as well. I think that would be really interesting. In all of these cases, we're not just talking even about any old Premier League player. Where is the money going to come from? That's what I want to know. And how much is Rashford prepared to sacrifice? Now, as I was saying on the Football Ramble the other day, Villa have got a huge decision here. Like, for me, he's played pretty well. And he's played some very good games since he's been there. But he's not been so relentlessly convincing that I'm sat there with the Aston Villa purse strings going, you know what, I will pay 360k a week for this guy on top of a 40 million fee, which, by the way, is completely out of the question for any European club, apart from PSG, who are no longer interested in him, just to clarify. So you're left with a situation, if Villa don't bite, and there might be a couple of reasons that they don't bite permanently, they might not make the Champions League. And not just because of that defeat at Manchester City the other night, but it's like the Italian race for the Champions League. There are too many good teams to get into those spots. There just aren't enough spots for them. And, you know, it's tight, even with the 5 qualifying this year. And so even if they get there, Villa have got to decide, how much are we prepared to commit to this? And Rashford's got to decide, how much am I prepared to commit in terms of pay cut to a situation where I feel I can really flourish and make the most of the rest of my 20s. I think from a football perspective, there are loads of those that you can think, yeah, I did great there. But even if you're cutting 2/3 off Rashford's wages, that's really hard for a lot of those clubs to attain. If it's north of 100, 150k, you're counting out a lot of teams already because they're taking a massive gamble on a player who's shown since he's been at Aston Villa that he's a good player, which we knew already. Is he showing that he can be your guy, your main guy for the whole season? Still a question mark. The only prediction I would make is, unless it's Villa, no one's buying him permanently this summer.
This question from Davis on Instagram, and it may not be unlinked to the Marcus Rashford situation, because I imagine from what you said, Andy, that PSG aren't interested in Marcus Rashford anymore. It might be partly because of the success of Khvicha Kvaratskhelia.
Yeah.
After he was plucked from the Georgian league, Davis asked, are clubs now looking at more unconventional leagues, Nicky, to find the next top talents?
Well, as we've just been discussing, some of them are even looking at the Premier League, Dotun. So,
But
really pushing outside the bubble.
But what I found interesting about this question is that the unconventional leagues would be Serie A in this case of Kvaratskhelia. You know what I mean?
Clubs are certainly looking everywhere, under every rock everywhere, and different clubs have different priorities. And there's certain clubs I could point at and say, this club has made a more concerted effort historically to branch out and look in more historically, I suppose, less obvious locations. But I don't know that that's brand new because of Kvaratskhelia. I think that we've reached a point of saturation at the point of the top level of European football, where there's just so many clubs looking for exactly this. I mean, this is finding gold, isn't it? It's finding literally just pure profit in a way that you can't achieve domestically. Well, I suppose you can if you produce a player through your academy, but who's got the energy to do that nowadays? But
the time and the energy, by the way. But yeah, Kvaratskhelia though.
But a club like Atalanta is looking everywhere they can, right? That's a club that's built its business model on bringing players in and selling them. And I think every club in Europe that is following a similar business model, which is a solid core of the mid-level clubs in Europe, are trying to run a business model like that, where they make themselves sustainable in the long term by being a selling club, by being able to find things and bring them in. They're looking where they can. Kvaratskhelia was absolutely one of those gems who surprised everyone with quite how good he was, and had slipped under most people's radars. But I don't know that his existence, and you may disagree with me, is setting off a brand new trend, particularly in terms of scouting.
No, I think you have to bear in mind with Kvaratskhelia that he's just atypical. And of course, he might have been, I think why he's atypical is because it's so unusual in this age where you have podcasts like On the Continent and people talking about European football all the time. It's unusual to be completely surprised by a player and think, where the hell did that guy come from? And a lot of people felt that about Kvaratskhelia when he came. But, of course, there would have been people who saw him in the Russian Premier League before. He ended up back in Georgia as a result of the Russian aggression in Ukraine, which meant some players moving out of there to somewhere else. Of course, there were other players who've taken the big money and gone completely the other way. That's a different story. But Kvaratskhelia wasn't in the Georgian league because he wasn't recognised as a good player. That might have been one of the reasons why he slipped under the radar for people. I guess a lot of people weren't watching Russian Premier League before that, but he wasn't a completely unknown quantity, even though he feels like that to a lot of us. So in terms of what would be unconventional now, I mean, look, I think it's interesting. We talked before about trends of, like, when you get a rich vein of English players or a rich vein of Japanese players or whatever. I think you always get that, and maybe it always takes a coach to start it off. Like, you look at Ange Postecoglou bringing players from the J League over to Celtic, for example, which has been a really rich vein for them. I wonder if the next one, if we're talking unconventional rather than necessarily smaller, that's the way that Davis has phrased it. I wonder if the Qatar Stars League is one of the next ones. Because, of course, you look at the way the balance of footballing power and the balance of transfers, certainly, the balance of transfer movement has changed in the Middle East in the last couple of years. So all the big players going to Saudi, not going to Qatar, that being your retirement league that's trying to become something a bit more. And then you look at the fact that players who've gone to Qatar, now they feel a little bit outside of the party. And you've got some real quality over there. Players who've gone there for like big money and then are going to be free at the other side. And we talked about it, didn't we, before? You know, when you and I and David Cartledge were talking about Vinicius, the possibility that, even though this won't be to a lot of people's taste, if he wanted to go and sign in Saudi Arabia, Vinicius Junior, he goes out there for 4 years, comes back still in his 20s, like having made a lot of money and still an available player. There are players who I know for a fact are doing that in Qatar. They've gone there for a lot of money. They're running down their contract, and they will be looking for a move back to Europe after that. The difference is the move will be to, if they're coming from Qatar, to Turkey, France, somewhere like that, where they won't pick up quite the same wages, but you know they'll still have a very, very good career at the top level of European football in that as they get into the back half of their 20s.
Thank you both for all your answers. Some very, must say, very interesting answers on all the questions. But I have to press you now because it's time for our game of the week, brought to you by FotMob. Each week, our experts recommend a game for you to watch at the weekend. And just as importantly, they also suggest the food that you should be having with it. Andy, what are you going for this week as your game of the week?
Yeah, I've gone for Sunday night, Boavista versus Sporting. Sporting at the top of the league, just at the moment. It's going to be a really interesting title fight with Benfica. They're level on points. Of course, Sporting would have won the league already if Ruben Amorim had still stayed there. And, maybe sometimes when he's gazing out the window, having his fourth coffee of the day at Carrington, he thinks, maybe I could have stayed there. Who knows? Maybe he thinks that, maybe he doesn't. But it's made the Portuguese title race a lot closer. You have the Clásico between Sporting and Benfica in the league in a couple of weeks' time. Then they play each other in the Portuguese Cup final after this week's semi-final results, the Taça de Portugal, which would be interesting. So a real fight between the two biggest clubs of Lisbon. Now, going to Boavista, it should be easy because Boavista...
it's got a social club.
Very good. Boavista, the second club of Porto, they've been leaking money left and right, as is normal when you're owned by Gerard Lopez. They've been banned from a succession of transfer windows. And this week, the financial problems have got so bad that the electricity at their stadium, the Bessa, has been cut off. So you might notice Sunday night, 8:30 p.m, I hope Victor Gyökeres is taking one of those camping torches because it could be difficult. Look, we'll see if the game goes ahead. Hopefully it will, obviously, if they find some money for the meter. But we are talking about an unprecedented situation, even with the financial problems that Boavista have had in recent years. But Sporting, they need the game to go ahead because they've got a busy schedule, and obviously they need not to slip up. But with Gyökeres at the front, reached 58 goals in all competitions for club and country this season with his goal in the Taça semi-final this week.
He scored 34 of Sporting's 78 league goals this season. Nicky, what would you go for as your game of the week?
So it's also on Sunday, but a little bit earlier at 2 o'clock UK time, which is Inter versus Roma. It was supposed to be on Saturday, but it's been moved to Sunday because of the Pope's funeral, which has gone down extremely poorly with Inter, given that they have got a Champions League tie against Barcelona coming up afterwards in midweek, and absolutely would have wanted that extra day to prepare for it. Although perhaps one could argue, given how their league form is now also wobbling a bit, whether or not they need the extra day rest before this as much as they do after it. But yes, a big game for Inter, clearly, after losing to Bologna. They play ahead of Napoli this weekend, which can be a blessing because obviously it allows you to win and put the pressure on them. But it means if they slip up, it opens the door to Napoli going ahead of them. And on the Roma side of it, 7th in the table, chasing a Champions League spot, undefeated in 17 league games under Claudio Ranieri. They are absolutely having their own push at the moment and trying to get up the table. It's a really finely poised one, I think, for both clubs.
And not to mention, Nicky, Inter have suffered successive defeats for the first time since spring 2023. Okay, that aside, Andy, let's go back to what we're going to eat, because I know Nicky's going to recommend some delicious food for us.
The pressure.
She's always ahead of you in terms. No, really, genuinely, always prefer what she offers us to eat with the matches that she recommends for game. Always, yeah. Pressure on him. So Boavista versus Sporting on Sunday at 8:30. What are we going to eat with it?
The thing is, right, you're trying to psych me out there. The only time I feel intimidated is where I'm doing a Bundesliga match and David Cartledge is sitting in that chair just like shaking his head going, no. As long as I can escape from the judgment of Cartledge, I'm absolutely fine. A culinary defeat to Italy, there is no shame in that.
That's true.
However, we are going to go onto one of those nice restaurants on the Avenida de Boavista, which goes through the heart of the district of Boavista in Porto. There is one exceptional Brazilian churrascaria there, so I'll leave that to your imagination. But elsewhere, if we're going to keep it Portuguese, we're going to go for the bacalhau Brás. Of course, there are so many different ways of doing cod, which is bacalhau in Portuguese. Bacalhau Brás is sort of a melange, bit of egg in there as well. It's just the perfect mix for this mixed up game, which we are hoping will happen.
Cod and eggs. No chips.
There's always chips and salad on the side in Portugal if you want it. I mean, come on. But it's not the done thing with bacalhau Brás.
What are we going to eat on Sunday at 2 p.m. whilst we're watching Inter versus Roma, Nicky?
Going for a classic cotoletta alla milanese, which is just a chicken cutlet smashed nice and flat and pan fried with breadcrumbs on, and nice heading into the summer where it's warming up, not too heavy. My mum always used to do it with little very small chopped roast potatoes and some olive oil, and to me that's a nice comfort food and a nice one for the time of year.
You know, if your mum's an exceptional cook, it's good form to bring some of the leftovers into the studio with you.
Sadly, she doesn't cook for me that often anymore. It's been quite a few years since that was.
Well, she can cook for us anytime she likes.
The campaign starts here.